Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio, a podcast that talks with architects to learn how they use Apple products in the practice of architecture, with your host, Neal Pan. This episode is sponsored by EntreArchitect. Learn more about EntreArchitect at EntreArchitect.com. I'm excited to have on the show an architect who started a leading residential architecture firm, founded an online education resource that has inspired thousands of architects to build better businesses. He's a successful podcaster, entrepreneur, and recently launched a new venture that continues his mission to teach sole proprietors, small firm architects, and students the importance of business success in the profession of architecture. I'm honored to welcome architect Mark R LePage to the show.
Hey, Neal. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely, Mark. I'm really thrilled to have you on. And Mark, I want to start by having you take us back to what inspired you to become an architect.
Yeah, I would love to tell that story. My wife and I, well, actually, no. I always start the story with my wife and I, but it actually goes way back further than that. What inspired me to become an architect was my creative side. You know, I was very creative as a kid, and I would constantly draw. I would always have a piece of paper and a pencil and really black and white drawings, just constantly drawing. And I was a big, big dreamer, and I still am a big dreamer. And I would draw my dreams, right, in order to make them reality. And so the things that I look into the future and I wanted to, someday achieve, I would draw them. And I would make them real. So as a kid, I would draw cars. My dad was an auto mechanic, and he was a Corvette collector. And so I grew up in this world of cars and hot rods and fast cars. And so I was a kid that loved fast cars and big trucks and, fast motors and all that stuff. And so I would draw that. I would draw Corvettes, and I would draw Camaros, and I would draw big four-wheel drive monster trucks. And the more I drew it, the better I got at it. And, those things started becoming real on the paper. And as I got older, I started dreaming about what my life would look like and what, my house would look like. And so I started drawing houses, and those houses would start looking a little bit more real and more, I could see my future. And so I always, as a kid, always imagined that I would be an artist when I grew up, right? When somebody asked me, what do you want to be? I would say, I want to be an artist. And my mom would say, well, artists don't make a lot of money, because, she thought, and this was obviously way before the internet, and, she would think artists were painters, right, or drawing, people who did drawings, or she didn't really look at artists beyond artists, right? And so she would say, well, if you could be an artist, you can be anything you want to be, right? My mom was always encouraging, and she would, all three of us, I have two brothers, always encouraged us to follow our dreams. To this day, dreams, that's probably why I'm a huge dreamer, because she's a big dreamer too. And she would encourage us to sort of look to our future and dream those big dreams. And when I realized that I also wanted to make a lot of money, I wanted to be rich.
That's a good goal.
As a kid, I want to be rich, right? I want to, and that as I got older, that goal changed a lot, because the money was less important as you get older. Other things, other priorities become important. But at that time, I was 10, and I discovered, artists don't make any money. Architects must make a lot of money, right? Architects are artists that draw buildings, right? That's what I thought in my 10-year-old mind. And so I'm going to be an architect. I declared it when I was 10 and never looked beyond that. I decided at 10 that I would be an architect, and everything in my life was then built to achieve that goal, including the assessment tests that you take when you're in high school to see what you could, your strengths, to see what you would do good in, as a career, what would be your strength as a career. I manipulated those tests to make sure that the result was architect. And so even that,
wow,
those tests came back, architect, you'd be a perfect architect, because I knew the answers to answer in those questions to make sure that architect would come out the answer. And so I never looked beyond that, which is good and bad, right? It's good to have a dream when you're 10 and focus on that and know what you want, right? It makes life much easier knowing what you want.
Sure.
But also, you never look beyond the blinders, right? Well, if all I see is architect, right, then all you do is become architect. Maybe there was other things that I could have become that, maybe I was, put here for some other reason. I don't believe that. I believe I was put here to do exactly what I'm doing today, which we'll get into, I'm sure. That was what inspired me. My mom inspired me to be creative, and money inspired me to choose architecture. Surprise, surprise.
And so nobody told you that architects really don't make any money.
No,
right?
I never knew any architects. I didn't know any architects. And so I didn't really meet an architect until, in high school, I started looking around for internships, and I would go knock on doors and meet architects. And no one ever told me until I got into architecture school. Then the professors in architecture school were really clear on that. If you don't want to do this as a passion, then you should get out and go do something else, which infuriates me today because it's not true. I think that architects can make money and could make a lot of money if that's the goal, but many of us choose not to.
Sure. So you had a goal. You were going to be an architect. You were going through high school, manipulating your tests.
Yeah.
How did you choose an architectural school that you wanted to go to? And which school did you attend?
Yeah, I attended Roger Williams University in Rhode Island. At the time, it was Roger Williams College. It actually shifted from college to university while I was there. My fifth year, it switched over. They built and established a law school, and it became a university. It's in Bristol, Rhode Island, about halfway between Providence and Newport, right on the Narragansett Bay.
Nice.
It was a brand new architecture building. I graduated high school in 1988. The architecture building was built in 1987. And Roger Williams was the first school I toured, just coincidentally. I just looked at all the schools that we potentially could go to. I wanted to sort of focus on the East Coast, so I went north up to, Massachusetts and all through New York and south to Maryland and all the different Virginia, all the different schools all along the East Coast. But the first one I visited just coincidentally was Roger Williams, and I met the staff there who was also young and enthusiastic and excited to be a newly accredited architecture program. The program had been around for about a decade, I think. But it was newly accredited with the new building. The new building was the last piece they needed to become accredited. And so everything was fresh and new. Like the building even smelled new, right? You could smell the carpet in the building.
Wow. Nice.
And the professors were excited to be there. And so
yeah.
I was excited. And the campus is beautiful. It's right on the Narragansett Bay. And so, it's a beautiful campus. And it's, a half hour to Providence and a half hour to Newport, Rhode Island. And it was a great place to be. And so everything I visited after that, which were mostly established, decades-year-old schools, RPI, where else did I tour? I went up to Boston somewhere, I don't remember, Syracuse. I went down to University of Maryland, Virginia. They're all 100, 200-year-old schools. And which is great, and those programs were great, but I compared everything to that shiny new school with those enthusiastic teachers. And so when it came down to choosing, I applied to 4 or 5 schools, got into all of them except Virginia, and only because Virginia really was the last one I applied to and didn't really put the effort into the assignments required to get in. I had already decided that I was going to Roger Williams when I applied to Virginia.
Nice.
And so that's where I went. Everybody, everything was being compared to that new building and those enthusiastic professors. And I loved it. It was a great, and today it's still a great school. It's sort of a very well-rounded school. It teaches a lot about both sort of the technical side and the creative side. And so you come out as a very well-rounded architect coming out of Roger Williams.
Nice. So obviously, the school had a major impact on you when you first visited. Was there any, you mentioned a lot of excited professors. Was there any one particular professor that kind of has had an impact on you that you still think about today?
He's no longer with us. I would say Grattan Gill is who I was probably most impacted in. He was very enthusiastic. All the professors, it was really a great crew of Rico Malazzi was there. I don't know if he's still there. it was a long time ago too, so I don't remember all of the professors there.
Sure.
They were very passionate about what they did. It was a great school to go to.
Awesome. So after that experience, during that time, you obviously started out, I'm going to be an architect. You go to college, you pick a shiny new school. Where did you think your career was going to head at that time? You're in school or maybe just after school. Where did you think you were going to go? What did you think you were going to do?
Well, much like deciding to become an architect, I also decided that I was going to own my own firm. And so that was also an established decision, right? It was never, I was an entrepreneur from birth. My dad was an entrepreneur as a mechanic. He owned his own shop and his own repair shop. And I didn't know it at the time, so I didn't really look at him as an entrepreneur. But as an adult looking back, clearly an entrepreneur, ran his own business, did his own marketing.
Right.
He and my mom. And so it's in my blood, and I never really wanted to do anything other than have my own business. I like controlling my own destiny. I like being able to do things my way. And so that was always part of the plan. Coming out of architecture school, I got a job with Barry Postganzer, who is a small firm in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and learned a lot. He did some development, and he was a very good business person. He sort of took me under his wing, and taught me architecture. And to this day, he takes full credit for my entire life because he also introduced me. He introduced me to Anne-Marie, my wife, because soon after he hired me, he hired Anne-Marie and told Anne-Marie that there was this lonely guy in the back who needed a girlfriend. and so he set us up right from the beginning. And to his surprise, we never told anybody in the firm that we were dating, and much less that when I left, I told them that we were engaged to get married. We kept it all a secret.
Wow.
Never told anybody in the firm that we were even dating. And so it was a big surprise when we left. So today he takes full credit for my family, my kids, my business, everything is all owed to Barry. So I appreciate that. And then after Barry, I left. And the intent was as a young intern, I wanted experience, right? Knowing that I wanted to start my own firm, I wanted experience. So Barry's firm was a small residential firm. Did some commercial work, did some development work, so really good, well-rounded experience. The next place I went was, at the time, it was called URS Consultants. Today, it's URS Corp, part of Grenier. Grenier merged with them. Today, one of the largest engineering/architecture firms in the world.
Okay.
And so I went to the complete opposite end of the profession and went to a huge firm and worked for them for about a year and experienced, knowing that I didn't want to work for a large firm, but wanted to experience that. And so I did that. And then when we got married, Anne-Marie and I got married, we moved to Westchester, New York, to Pleasantville, actually, is the town that we moved to. And I got a job with Kyer, Garman, and Davidson. Russ Davidson, who was the former past president, actually the past president of AIA National, was one of the partners at that firm. I became Dick Kyer's right-hand man, basically became his drawing board, and worked very closely with all three partners, specifically Dick Kyer, and really learned a lot from him. He taught me architecture, taught me mostly about how to interact with people. He was very good with clients and very good with contractors, and taught me a lot. And working so closely with him, he basically designed things, and I did everything else for him. Did all the construction drawings, did a lot of the construction administration, learned a lot about architecture there. And I was on track to become a partner, and I always knew that I wanted to be my own boss and chose to leave to start 5Cat, my architecture firm. And so did that after about 4 or 5 years with them, and then moved on and started the architecture firm with Anne-Marie.
So that's really fascinating. So you were on a track to be an owner, to be maybe not your own person,
right,
calling every shot.
Yeah. But
what made you decide to move away from that and go start 5Cat?
Yeah, I mean, and you could see it in EntreArchitect and the things that I'm doing at EntreArchitect. I saw the profession differently. I saw the profession as a place that needed to look at a firm as a business. And KG&D at the time was much like all the other firms, and I know that's a general statement, but many of the other firms, that the business side and the profitability of the business, and I didn't know, it was a pretty closed group in terms of the business side, which was pretty traditional back then, that they didn't really show the books, didn't really show how the business worked, which I think needs to change, because that's how architects learn to build better businesses, is to have as the intern learning the business side as well, right? So they can become better employees, or they can go off and become successful architects, which strengthens the profession. And so to answer your question, I always knew that I wanted my own firm. I wanted the control. I wanted to do it my way, and I wanted to do it differently. Yeah. I did try to have some influence, but I was 28, 29 years old. I was a kid. Yeah. And they didn't really want to hear my suggestions, right? I had some ideas on how they can do what they did better. Sure. I presented those to the partners, and it wasn't really received. It was heard, right? They listened, and then they told me to go back to the drafting board. They weren't rude about it, but they basically said, go back to the drafting board and go do your thing. We got this under control. And they're a successful firm, so they're doing something right. Sure. But I wanted to do things my way, right? And so I wanted to go and start my own firm, and I wanted to have my own control and the freedom that comes with that, right? Anne-Marie and I, from the very beginning, wanted to have our own firm so we could have our own family and raise our kids and have that integrated life, which I also would not have if I became a partner in a medium-sized firm with 15, 20 people. Right. I wouldn't have the flexibility to do what I want with my kids and go to every single sporting event and every single class play and every single back-to-school night. I never missed any of them. It was all part of my life because it was intentional to live a life that way. And so we made sacrifices in the business, right, in order to do that. But I had the freedom to do that. I had the freedom to build the business that supported the lifestyle and the family that I wanted to have. And so I left and started my own firm. So you've got your own firm. You're doing that. And then the internet comes along. It's a little further along now, and you've got all these ideas, and you start blogging. That's right. Take me through the idea of what your goal was when you started blogging, and how that eventually became EntreArchitect. Yeah. When we launched our firm in 1999, immediately we built a website. And in 1998, 1999, which is 1998 was when we started thinking about it and started building the website, no architects had websites. I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, I would go to AIA chapter meetings and encourage architects to get a website, and they'd be like, we don't need websites. What do we need websites for? That's just, what do we need that for? Right. And so I had a website, right? We built our website in 1998, launched in 1999. And so when people searched for architects in Westchester County, New York, I was the one that came up, right? And so we launched our firm using the internet, leveraged the internet. Okay. And I'm a tech guy. I like technology. I love the internet and what it can do. And I've loved it from the very beginning. I was a charter member of AOL and, spent time on AOL. And from the very early 90s, I was online, right? Yeah. And so it was just part of me, and it was just made sense to build the website and build a business that way. Google didn't even exist. It was all other search engine, Alta Vista. Yes. Yeah, and Ask Jeeves and Yahoo, I think, was soon after that. And so the blog came about because I learned about blogs and what blogs were, and I followed other blogs. And so I built a blog called Living Well in Westchester for the firm. Okay. And I would write with the audience being my potential clients. And so I would write much like sort of like a home and garden magazine, that sort of vibe. I would write, how-to articles and what's going on in the firm and the type of projects that we're doing. And so I would write a blog once a week about what was happening. And that became a big marketing tool for us because the blog attracted, it helped with search results. And
Sure.
at the time, there were no other architecture blogs in Westchester County. And so they found me again, right? They found the website, they found the blog.
Right.
And they would follow the blog. They would subscribe and they would follow the blog. And they would get to know me through my writing. And so it was a way for me to sort of build that rapport before I got to the doorbell. So when I got to the doorbell, I'd ring the doorbell and they would invite me in like this old friend because they've been reading my blog for the past year and a half or whatever.
Right.
And so it became a really powerful marketing tool. And today, blogs still work that way if you focus on them. They're certainly not as anywhere near as powerful as they were in the 90s and early 2000s, but they still work. And so that was the first blog. And then because I am the business side of the firm, I joke often, and everybody who follows me has heard me say this 1,000 times. I always joke that Anne-Marie and I make the perfect architect when we come together because she loves architecture. She loves design. She loves everything that the traditional architect would love to do, and she hates business.
Okay.
And I love the business side. I love the people connections. I love working with contractors, and I love the game of business, the financial management stuff of it, and the marketing and the sales and all of that. I enjoy it.
Okay.
And so together we work really well, right? I would get the work, she would design it, I would create the drawings, I would get it built. Then we would just keep doing that over and over and over again. And we built a really successful architecture firm in Westchester doing high-end small projects, we call them, basically additions and alterations for really high-end homes.
Okay.
And because I was the business side, I started a second blog called Entrepreneur Architect, and I wrote it was for me. It was just a place where I could post my ideas and put links to things I found interesting. And because it was about business and architecture, in 2007, I started that blog. That also found an audience pretty quickly because there was very little information about business in the profession of architecture at all. The AIA certainly wasn't presenting anything about business back then.
Sure.
There were very few other platforms talking about architecture and business and architecture. And so that blog found an audience very quickly. And over the years, that audience became a community in the comments. And so I would write something, they would post a comment, I would respond to the comment. It was before social media.
Yeah.
And the community, which eventually evolved into the EntreArchitect community, started in that blog in 2007. And that community was the inspiration for everything else that we've done from that point forward. Because as that community strengthened and that blog grew, that community encouraged me to turn it into something bigger, something different, something more powerful, more influential for the profession. And so after lots of procrastination in 2012, I relaunched it as EntreArchitect.
Wow. Fascinating. I mean, seeing and hearing everything you've done leads me to the point of this is what you were meant to do. And I mean, it's pretty much, that's the culmination of that is really getting to that point. So you've done it. But now I'm curious, how has your career evolved since you've established EntreArchitect in 2012, I guess, with the 12-12-12 project, right?
Correct. Yeah. Right. At the end of 2012, I recognized that the date December 12th, 2012 was coming. I thought that was interesting. And the community had been encouraging me for years to turn it into something more. I would promise for years that I would turn it into something more. I would plan to turn it into something more, and then I would procrastinate about turning it into something more, right? Because I was afraid, right?
Sure.
It's a big leap to sort of relaunch something, and it was intentionally from the beginning launched as a platform for a small firm, for the profession. It wasn't for me, it was for the profession.
Yeah.
With the intention of influencing the profession. From day one, that's what it was. And I decided that I was going to launch the podcast that same day. And so I used that date, 12-12-12. I posted it on the blog. The blog post is still there. If you search 12-12-12 project and my name, you'll find it. And it was an announcement saying that I'm going to do something that would change my life and it would have a positive impact on the world. That was what I announced. That on 12-12-12, I'm working on a project that is going to change my life and have positive impact on the world. And I encouraged others to do the same thing. So other people had 12-12-12 projects as well. And so on December 12th, 2012, at 12:12 p.m.,
oh my,
I pushed the button and I launched EntreArchitect.com as a platform and published the first episode of EntreArchitect podcast. Same day, same time. And for the first year, I think it was the first year I did it monthly, and I think I published on 12/12 every month for that year.
Right.
And then the second year I decided to go weekly, and it's been weekly ever since. We've downloaded way more than 2 million episodes since we launched in 2012. And it's been a huge success. And it's really been, the podcast has really been the driving force that sort of has helped EntreArchitect platform grow, because people are looking for that information, finding the podcast and becoming part of the community. And then there's lots of ways for people to become part of the community. There's free ways and there's paid memberships and all kinds of things.
How has that grown over the last 8 years, and how has that changed? Are you still doing 5CAT? Are you still doing architecture?
That's
the traditional architecture?
That is a very common question. I technically am still practicing. We still have an architecture firm. When I recently moved from New York, Westchester County, where we were, to the Charlotte, North Carolina region. And so now we're in North Carolina. And we closed the firm in New York. We have a couple of little projects up there still, but we basically brought that firm down. We had planned to move, so we brought the firm down to pretty much zero with the intent of closing New York, starting something new in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. What we're planning in North Carolina is development. We're going to do residential development. We're not going to do client work here. And so now with the economy and COVID, we've sort of delayed that for now on starting that. But that's the intent of what we're going to do here architecturally, is that we already own the property that we're going to develop. It's just a matter of timing it, getting it funded, and then Anne-Marie and I will work the way we've always worked. I will do all the outside work, and she'll design some amazing buildings, and I'll get them built and sell them, and we'll do that over and over and over again and have a lot of fun doing it.
Awesome. You're doing that. You're still doing architecture. You've got Entre. Tell me about Gābl.
Gābl. It's okay. Everybody calls it Gābl. It's Gābl. The A has a little line over it, so it's a long A. The idea is that it's all one big roof, right? That's how you'll remember Gābl.
Okay.
And so Gābl Media, that's an interesting story. Gābl Media is part of Gābl Technologies. And Gābl Technologies is a new company that I started when I moved to North Carolina. It was a plan that I had planned to do it later. Gābl Technologies was one of those big ideas that someday I'm going to get to it. And God has his way of forcing me to do the things that he wants me to do. And when I got to North Carolina would not let me register the entity EntreArchitect LLC. In New York, I shortened it to EntreArch LLC in New York. They accepted that. They wouldn't let me use the word architect in New York either, even though I'm a licensed architect. I wasn't practicing architect with EntreArchitect.
I see.
It was not an architecture firm, so I wasn't allowed to use the word architect in New York, but they allowed me to use EntreArch.
Okay.
And so when I moved to North Carolina, I said, okay, I'm just going to close the LLC in New York, start an EntreArch LLC here in North Carolina, and we'll be, just keep going.
Right.
And when I applied to register for EntreArch LLC in North Carolina, they said nope.
Oh.
And they clearly did a search.
Yeah.
Found out that EntreArch is this platform.
I see.
And they said no. And so I said, okay, well, I guess that's time. It's time to launch on Gābl Technologies.
Okay.
And the plan for Gābl Technologies is a company that's going to develop software and online resources for architects. So we're going to develop all the stuff that we as an architectural community are constantly looking for in order to run our businesses, right? And so we're looking for these tools. None of them are built for architects. They're all built for other businesses. So Gābl Technologies is intended to develop that software someday. Right now, I have too many other things going on to start a tech, a software company. But that's the plan.
Right.
And it happened now because I moved to North Carolina. So I established Gābl Technologies in North Carolina. EntreArchitect is now owned by Gābl Technologies. At the same time, or around the same time, one of the workshops, we do workshops at EntreArchitect, multi-week workshops, and I team up with Steve Wintner for the Profit Workshop.
Okay.
We also developed a branding and marketing workshop. I teamed up with Jeff Eccles to develop the Build Your Brand workshop. And that's a 4-week workshop. And as we developed the Build Your Brand workshop, we said, this should be something more than just this workshop. And if you've ever heard Jeff Eccles' voice, you're like, he has got to be on the radio. He's got to be on a podcast. He has a perfect voice for it. And so we talked about it, and we said, okay, well, someday let's do something. Let's do a podcast or something more than just this workshop. So that was a plan. We're going to do that. Didn't set any deadlines and didn't really pursue it. But then the idea for Gābl Technologies is still floating around, and I met with my friend Demetrius Lynch, who is the creator of Spaces podcast, which is another great podcast that everybody should subscribe to. And I met with him because we had become friends over the years, just becoming, both architects, and much like you and I have become friends because of we're architects and we're both podcasters and we like the same stuff. And so Demetrius is similar to that. And so I met Demetrius in Las Vegas at the convention and had breakfast with him and said, we just started comparing notes and we have similar ideas, right? He wants to create something that's going to impact the world through architecture. I am creating something and want to continue creating something. So we started brainstorming and saying, well, what if this? What if that? What if this? Right. And so we were both excited about it. And so we left there saying, why don't we team up doing something? And so when I got back, I thought, well, why don't we start the Build Your Brand podcast? We'll get Jeff Eccles to come. I'll team him up with Demetrius to come and become my creative director. And Demetrius and Jeff Eccles can get together and create Build Your Brand podcast. And it'll become a second EntreArchitect podcast. And that's what it is. It's EntreArchitect, Build Your Brand podcast with Jeff Eccles, totally created without my input at all, other than, some basic comments.
Right.
But it was created by Jeff. The content was created by Jeff. It was edited and produced and sound designed and all of that stuff by Demetrius. I'm so proud of it. They did such a good job with it. And that is a season of 12 episodes. Comes out every 2 weeks on Tuesdays, and it teaches you how to build a successful brand by telling the story of the Southwest Airlines brand.
Interesting.
So he tells the entire story, the history of how it started, and then the evolution of the Southwest Airlines brand. He pulls a lesson from what they've done and applies it to how architects can apply it to their firms.
Right.
And the idea is that we'll do another season, a second season with a different company and do the same thing. Tell the story of another successful brand and how architects can learn from that.
Wow.
So proud of it. And super highly well-produced.
Right.
Really well done. And so once that was launched, I'm like, Demetrius, we need to do more than this, right? We need to turn this into more than just 2 EntreArchitect podcasts. Let's build a network. Let's create a division of Gābl Technologies that invite other architects to come, because there's leaders all over the world who have lots of knowledge, who are already potentially sharing it through platforms or on social media and are considering doing a podcast. But you and I both know how much effort and work it takes to launch, to create and develop and publish and promote and monetize a podcast, right? It takes a lot of work. And so the intent of Gābl Media is to be able to do all of that other stuff for architects and engineers and contractors, the whole AEC industry. We are building a multimedia network that does podcasts, video series, and print publishing eventually for the AEC industry. So right now we have 4 podcasts on the network. We're in development on 2 more that are currently in development. And we're talking with several other people who are interested in creating podcasts. So if you're interested, go over to Gābl, GāblMedia.com. Gābl is spelled with no E, Gabl media.com. And, and go see what we're doing over there.
Wow, Mark, you've had an amazing architectural journey. You've enriched the lives of so many other people. And I'm sure everyone listening to this, is just going to be inspired by all the things that you can do in architecture, all the different possibilities. I mean, this conversation just leads, from somebody that went from drawing cars and then drawing houses to now the leader of a technology media company, really. It's an incredible journey. So with that, we're going to take a short break, and after, we'll explore your exposure to the Mac and learn more about your Apple journey right after this. This episode of Inside the Apple Studio is sponsored by EntreArchitect. As a small firm architect, do you sometimes feel like something is missing? You have the projects, you have the team, you have the software and equipment, but every month is a struggle. The firm that you may have thought was everything you dreamed has turned out to be a burden, a stressful burden, and you don't know why. Could it be that when you built your firm, you focused on being a great architect and forgot that on the day you decided to launch your firm, you also became an entrepreneur? You became a small business owner. The secret to success as a small firm architect is to focus on the fundamentals and to build a better business. A strong, healthy business will allow you to be the architect that you want to be. And our friends at EntreArchitect can help. EntreArchitect Academy is a membership program dedicated to small firm entrepreneur architects just like you. With business resources, training, and a community of like-minded professionals, all focused on building better businesses. If you want to learn more, visit entrearchitect.com/join. That's ENTRE architect.com/join. Welcome back. Mark, you've taken us through your architecture journey. Now let's discuss how you started using a Mac and eventually other Apple products in your architectural practice. Now, you didn't start off as a Mac user. What were you using before that?
Nope. My first computer was a Gateway, 1992. Actually, my first computer was I think, I don't know, one of those other home computers that you get when you were a kid in the 80s.
Right.
Commodore, maybe?
Yeah. Yep. 20 or something.
Yeah, I think it was a Commodore. But the first computer I bought was in 1992, Gateway, and it was a great computer at the time. I signed up for AOL as soon as the disc showed up in the mailbox, and so I was a user of AOL very early, and then eventually moved to Dell. When I started my firm, they were all Dells, so I had Dell PCs forever, and had Windows all throughout that. And then probably the same story that many of your guests are going to have in their transition from one side to the other. I got tired of the crashes. I got tired of the incompatibilities and the meltdowns that Microsoft just sort of was part of using Windows computers.
Right.
And it was just acceptable. It was just the way it is. Oh, it locked up again, restart, reboot.
Yeah.
Or they would have an automatic update. Even if you told it to not automatically update, it would automatically update right when you're ready to do some important project. And you'd have to wait for hours because back then the time to update would take hours. And
sure.
A lot of it was disks that you'd have to update with, or when the internet was part of it, then the internet would kick in and it would take hours to update to a simple software update. And so I just got tired of that. And what had happened, my first transition to Mac was a Mac Mini server.
Interesting.
I had a giant Dell server with multi-disks in it that was running my firm. I had 6 employees at the time, 5 employees, 6 including me. And so we had 6 workstations. And I had this big giant Dell, looked like a coffee table sitting in on my rack. I had a computer closet with the rack and the hubs and all of everything.
Right.
And the server crashed, or was about to crash, was starting to crash, right? You can see that it was failing. And I replaced that once throughout the early years. And then decided to try a Mac Mini server, did some research, and went and bought a Mac Mini server. The Mac Mini server was 1.5 inches thick, 10 by 10, right? I took it, I brought it into the closet, I put it on top of the Dell server, so I made it a table, and I ran 6 Dells The workstations were all still PC.
Yeah.
And just ran it through the server. So it became my file server.
Okay.
And was super reliable, right? I still had Windows on the workstation side. It was just a file server and never crashed, ever. It never had a problem with it. The integration, trying to get the Mac mini server to work nice with the PCs, that became, complicated at times.
Right.
Lots of, having to have the right words and the right dots in the right place.
Right.
And I do not miss that at all.
I bet.
That was so frustrating trying to get those things to work. And it would take up so much time. You'd want to be an architect and you'd want to do your projects and you'd spend days tinkering with wires and computers. It was just so frustrating.
Right.
And so with that reliability, I just gradually started transitioning everything over to Mac. So as a PC would die, we would just replace it with a Mac computer.
Okay.
And just slowly moved over. So we would have, we'd start moving. I originally bought an iMac for me, and then just slowly transitioned everybody over to Macs. And now it's all Mac. I've been 100% Mac for years. I run originally I launched EntreArchitect on the iMac. Since then, this is my second MacBook. I had a 15-inch MacBook. Now I have it's still a 15-inch MacBook. So I got in 2019, got a 15-inch MacBook loaded. The one I have now is a loaded MacBook. Top of the line, has everything. And I run, right now, what you're looking at me, Neal. The people on the podcast can't see me, but
Yes.
I have my Mac over to my left, my MacBook over to my left with the monitor open. So I have my calendar over there.
Sure.
Right in front of me, I have an LG monitor that I'm running off of it. I have two other monitors flanking that main monitor. So I have 3 monitors that I work with, plus the MacBook to my left, all running off the MacBook. And then I have 2, thanks to you, I have 2 external drives, MyBooks.
Yeah.
I have 2 MyBook external drives that are backups and external archives. And I have, and then I have software backups as well.
Sure.
I have a bunch of things that you recommended that I do, and I have all that stuff cloning and backing up automatically.
Right. So I'm curious, as you were in the process of this transition, I know a lot of people in the profession or firm owners are concerned about even having a mixed environment. What were you using to create your architecture side? I mean, doing the drawings, what were you using at the time that you could use on both that assisted in that transition?
Yeah, I was using AutoCAD. I was using AutoCAD LT. I've always used AutoCAD LT. I still to this day, and mostly because my firm has shrunk to zero.
Right.
I never transitioned to BIM.
Okay.
And so we ran AutoCAD LT forever and built the firm on that, and all the CDs were all done on AutoCAD LT, which ran on both sides. And so they had a Mac version of AutoCAD, and they had a PC version of AutoCAD. And so they played well together. They both made DWG files.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, really having that ability to run the same program basically on 2 platforms allowed that to happen. So it's real important for, software developers, if they're looking at supporting both platforms, to do so, because it allows somebody like yourself to do what you've done. So it's really important.
If I had transitioned to BIM, I would have a problem, right?
Yeah.
I would have to run parallels on my Macs to even run Revit.
Right.
I never did that. I never wanted to do that.
Right.
But I'm sure that works for some firms.
I'm curious, Mark, what's been your experience of using a Mac? Explain what it's like to use a Mac.
I love my Macs. I love the reliability. I've never looked back, right? I've never had a problem with my Macs ever. Eventually they wear out and you have to replace them, and they sort of tell you that, it's time to, they would start locking up on you or something.
Sure.
I've had a little bit of issues with the newest update, and I've discovered that it's my flanking remote monitors that are the problem. It was locking things up. That was a little frustrating. But if I put those to sleep, everything else stays on and works out well. And so I just love the reliability of it. And it's funny because Anne-Marie, my wife and partner, she's not a computer person at all.
Yeah.
And it's funny because she has a little 13-inch MacBook, and she has a little an iPad mini, and she has an iPhone, the latest iPhone. And so, and she has them all like stacked up on top of one another. And so she can do whatever she wants to do whenever she wants to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing. That's why I have a MacBook instead of an iMac, because I can unplug it and go. Right. And I can do what I'm doing here anywhere. And so I love it. And the other thing, the secret that only you know, when I updated my last iPhone, I went to the other side.
Oh, yes.
I bought a Samsung, I think it was an S10, and loved it, but very quickly realized that all of my integrations, all of the stuff that automatically updates and integrates and syncs up with everything else, all that Mac stuff that you don't even realize is important until you try to shift over to another platform, I missed it so much with my messages and my email, that I sent it back and I got an iPhone 10. And so I still have my iPhones, and so I've never gone to the other side after. I started my first smartphone was a Droid.
Okay.
And then very quickly switched over to iPhones and never looked back.
Yeah. I'm curious, a lot of firm owners and a lot of sole practitioners out there that are running their firms. Okay, so you've got your main computer application, your BIM or CAD drawing, and there's other BIM applications that'll run on the Mac as well, so you don't have to use Revit. But what other types of applications do you use on your Mac to run your firm for timekeeping or project management or anything else that is involved in running your firm?
Yeah, well, I use Slack for everything.
Okay.
And so I have Slack channels for EntreArchitect. I have Slack channels for my architecture firm. I even had a Slack channel for my family when we were doing some projects. We sort of organized it on Slack.
Yeah. And
so Slack is a big piece of it. I use Fantastical as my calendar, which I love. Works really great with syncing up with my iPhone and integrates with my Google Calendar because I'm running Google Calendar. And so it syncs up with Google Calendar really well. What else am I working on a daily basis? Oh, I love my email. I use Spark for email.
Okay. Interesting.
A lot of automated email work that's really great. And that also syncs really well with my iPhone, a great iPhone app. I use Zoom all day long, every day, for years, way before COVID showed up. Yeah, because EntreArchitect is all based on connecting with other people and presenting things like that. And so I didn't use it for the architecture firm, but for EntreArchitect, I use it a lot. But I was before we moved to North Carolina and decided to close the firm up in New York, we were in the process of transitioning to ArchiCAD, which would run on Macs, which is why I was looking at that. I procrastinated. The reason I procrastinated is because I kept going back and forth between ArchiCAD and Revit on Parallels.
Sure.
And then never made the decision. So when we start doing development, we're going to do the design. So I'm going to eventually have to choose one and learn it. And so because we're going to do all that work ourselves, eventually I'm going to have to make that decision and do one or the other. Then I'll call you and say, how do I do this?
Exactly. If anyone's listening to this and considering using a Mac in their practice, what advice would you give them?
If you are on a PC and you are considering using a Mac, I would just dive in 100%. And I think anybody who's running a Mac is going to say that same thing. They are just intuitive and reliable and do everything that you want them to do. And so other than Autodesk not playing nice with Apple, clearly they have abandoned Apple, there's no reason to not go to Mac, because it does everything that the PCs do more reliably. And I've been back on other computers, other PCs. My parents have a PC laptop that's running, the most recent Windows, and I still don't get it. It looks like the same problems that I was having 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And they're still calling, tech support to solve those problems. And I'm like, just switch over. And so I bought them iPhones and iPads. So they're in transition. They're in their late 70s and they are in transition to full Mac over there.
Wow. Well, Mark, I appreciate you sharing your Apple journey, but before we move on to our final segment, I'd like you to share with the audience one app, utility, or service that you find most useful.
I would say Spark. I would say my email, Spark. First of all, it's beautiful. The user interface is intuitive and it's beautiful. And it does lots and lots of automated. It'll hold your emails and time them. It'll schedule your emails to go out when you want them to go out. They'll automatically file them in folders, and it just works really, really well. And so I would say Spark for email.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing it. I appreciate it. And if you're interested, it's got Mark's seal of approval there. So as we close out our time, I'd like to wrap up with our 10 questions. Let's get started with the very first one here. What's your favorite word?
Favorite word is love. I say at the end, and I know we're only supposed to do one word, but I just want to say this real quick. My 3 favorite words are love, learn, share. And if you listen to the podcast, you can learn more.
What's your least favorite word?
Before we started this, I told you that the negatives were harder. So my least favorite word would probably... Let me come back to that one, Neal.
Okay. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Connections. Bringing 2 people together. So those 2 people individually, when they come together, they are individually more powerful is my favorite thing in the world to do.
What turns you off?
Secretive. Being secretive.
What sound or noise do you love?
The creaking spring on the screen door of my parents' river house on the St. Lawrence River.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Screaming in my house.
What's your favorite curse word?
I do not have a favorite curse word. I actually don't like curse words.
Okay. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would love to customize cars.
What profession would you not like to do?
I don't think I could ever be a doctor.
So let's go back to new question number 2 on my list here. Before we get to the last one.
Yeah.
What's your least favorite word?
My least favorite word is...
Could be a swear word.
You want me to say it?
No.
Actually, that's
okay.
That's actually, I could say that. I would say fuck might be my least favorite word because people are using it throughout the internet and through our society as if it's an okay word to use, and I don't believe it's an okay word to use. I think it's degrading our society in so many ways.
I think that's a great answer. Our last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Heaven does exist in my mind and in my world, and he is going to say, good job.
Awesome, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. Mark R LePage, thank you.
Thank you, Neal. I appreciate you inviting me on your show, and I appreciate you for doing this. I think this is going to be a fantastic series, and I'm really happy to be part of it. Thanks.
Thank you. I have been your host, Neal Pan, and thank you for listening to this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank my guest, Mark R LePage, for joining me, and EntreArchitect for sponsoring this episode. Learn more about EntreArchitect at EntreArchitect.com, and be sure to follow the show by selecting the follow button in Apple Podcasts or in your favorite podcast app. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com.